Welcome back to the top 30 best movies of 2021 as part of the 2021 Justin and Tyler Movie Awards, and we're into our top 20, in fact, beginning with this video, which is number 20 through number 11, and Tyler's going to start us off this time with his number 20. So by the way, we apologize about the God Ray coming down the middle of our table here. There's literally nothing we can do about it.
My number 20 is A Quiet Place Part 2.
Ooh, okay.
I kind of feel like just the movie wasn't needed. Kind of like,
Okay.
I'll go back to Star Wars for some reason, but like Rogue One also wasn't needed. But I really liked it. And I really like this one too. It's just the first one was special. Legit one of my favorite horror movies.
Okay.
And this just, I said this in a previous video, I think it's just lesser in pretty much all ways. You know, like, all ways. Like, Cillian Murphy is a nice trade-off, I suppose, but he doesn't have the chemistry with Emily Blunt, obviously, that her husband has. But I like seeing him. It's just the movie's lesser because you don't have that real chemistry between them, and I think the story's just lesser. Everything's lesser, but it's still a really good movie.
Okay.
It's a really good horror movie. Maybe it wasn't necessary, but they made it, and it could have went off the rails completely.
Yes.
But it didn't, and, you know, it's my number 20, which still ain't a bad place to be.
No, and well, especially for you, given the high volume of things that you saw this year. I can get on board with the idea that it wasn't necessary. What I will say is if you were going to do a second movie, I think you had to expand the universe of The Quiet. If you were gonna do a second movie, it couldn't just be the same movie a second time.
Right.
It just in terms of like the setting, and like that had to expand a little bit. So it did get to expand a little bit, and I thought that was like if you were gonna do the movie, that was the way to do it. So on that level, I found that satisfying. But I could probably get on board with the idea that like Quiet Place could have been a one and done, and nobody really would have had a great complaint about that.
Yeah, but the catch-22 of the necessity of expansion, which I do agree with, is that it also became less personal in the process, I thought.
Yeah.
So it became a weaker movie doing what it had to do, which is a crappy place to be. So look, there was no way that the sequel was going to be as good or better than the original.
My number 20 best movie of 2021 is The Suicide Squad. And James Gunn is pretentious. I can't get away from the idea that I think he's a little pretentious, but the man makes a heck of a movie within the smell of his own farts. I will say that.
This is an interesting criticism / compliment.
Right, it's like I don't dislike James Gunn in the least based on what I see on film. Not at all. I can't get away from the concept of pretense, and I guess in a way, probably in a fairly big way, really successful directors have to be at least a little bit pretentious about their own work. I can't even really point to specific elements. Like I can't defend this position at all. It's just a feeling that I have, and so maybe I'm completely off base in that. Maybe people perceive him completely differently than that, but that's just kind of the way I feel when I see a James Gunn movie. But again, within that context, I think he makes excellent movies, and I would consider this a pretty darn good movie. Certainly a significant upgrade over the previous one. I cared a lot more about these characters by the end of the movie than I expected to. Yeah. I expected that I would care about the ones in the previous movie more than this one.
Yeah.
And it wound up being the opposite. I cared about these characters more than the ones in the first one. I have to wonder exactly how much more territory there is to mine with the Harley Quinn character. I'm sure Margot Robbie wants to keep doing it, but I don't know how much more territory there is. Mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned, as it was an improvement over its predecessor, so it winds up being the number 20 movie for me of 2021.
We gotta, like, dwell on this pretentious thing for a second.
Okay.
Because I find it interesting. Because here was a director that made his career originally, or maybe he didn't become as famous, obviously, but he was, like, doing, like, trashy, like, trauma flicks. You know, doing, like, that gory and the B-movie stuff that, you know, that's really entertaining, but it has a certain style. And you actually see a lot of that in the Suicide Squad. And now you're calling it pretentious. And you can't figure out why. Because so you're stupid. But I'm gonna extend an olive branch here, so you don't feel completely stupid.
Alright.
It's kind of like me and the Coen brothers. Sometimes their movies just feel really off for me, and I can never put my finger on why. So I actually understand. Some people be like, well, you can't explain why, but I get it. I don't agree with you on Gunn, but I get this feeling of, like, sometimes it's just a feeling you get and you can't necessarily put it into words, so I understand that. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone call James Gunn pretentious. Alright, so for my number 19, let's keep the superhero thing going, and we're gonna go Black Widow on this one.
Yeah. Totally fair.
I said earlier, I love superhero movies. This is no different. It probably benefited a little bit from the MCU movie drought. I know there was, like, some shows earlier that kind of helped fill that void a little bit, but in terms of the movies, I think it benefited a little bit from that, because I was, like, so excited to see the opening splash animation and stuff of, you know, Marvel, and be like, oh, here we are in the theater watching a movie, even though it wasn't one that I've really ever wanted. Okay. But here's my thing I always say about it. I think it's a great movie at the wrong time.
Yeah.
It's not an original opinion. A lot of people share it. I'm just better at wording it. No, because this is what it is. It's like, I think if you would have released this years ago, it would have been great, and I might have even rated it higher. Because you can't remove it from the context of what you already know.
100%.
Even though it's not the storyteller's fault that we know what's happening to this character, so it's harder to invest in her adventures, basically. It's not the writer's fault, but we already know, and you can't just exist in a vacuum, especially with the MCU, because that's counterproductive to what they want you to do.
Right.
So it does get hurt a little bit from when it was released, and it's you know, even if that's not even a commentary on the quality of the movie itself, because I actually think it was a really fun movie. And then they had, like, that really, like, dark cover of, like, I think Smells Like Teen Spirit, wasn't it? Near the beginning?
I think, yes, yeah, it was.
And I know that was, like, the trendy thing to do, to take, like, popular songs and make them just darker and slow them down, but it works. It's a trend because it works.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I really liked it. I mean, watching ScarJo in that role again was a lot of fun. And we got, I'm going to screw up her name, Elaine, I think her name is. Who was a good character. We got that, which led into her in Hawkeye this year and stuff like that. So we did get something from it, and they did add that, like, post-credits thing to do that it kind of tied into the now.
Yeah.
Which I was scared they wouldn't do, because if they did, like, a post-credits that didn't tie into now, like, what are you doing? Or no post-credits at all would be even...
Yeah, no post-credits would have been worse, because to set up the expectation for dozens of movies at this point, and then to not do it for this one, I think would have just drawn a lot of ire. My number 19, best movie of 2021 is a movie called Zola. I don't know whether you got a chance to watch this or not. Did you? All right. So it's the story of two exotic dancers who travel down to Florida and get caught up in sex trafficking. So it's based off of a viral Twitter thread, which I think was like a 136 tweet thread or something like that. And it's like, well, apparently you can make full-fledged movies on Twitter threads now. And that's welcome to 2021. It's the world that we live in. Look, I enjoyed this movie just from an entertainment perspective. This movie was entertaining. I got past the fact that it felt like Riley Keough was doing an 85-minute Iggy Azalea impression, and that hurt. Like, I'm not gonna lie, as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, oh god, this just grates. Every time she speaks, it grates at me. But I enjoyed the movie despite everyone in this movie being an idiot. everybody in this movie is just the dumbest. Like there's no smart character in this movie at all, with the exception potentially of Eazy-E. Like he might be smart, but then he winds up kind of showing himself to be dumb as well. Don't have to think too deep about it. Entertainment. Like at one point when Zola breaks out the line, and I'm gonna say this, sorry YouTube censors, pussy is worth thousands, bitch, when she finds out how much the guy is actually charging. It's like $150 or something. It's just like, what? It's like, I'm sorry, $150. So like, it's just really entertaining moments in this movie that add up to an entertaining whole. So that's where I put Zola at number 19 on the year. Movie I thought had some satisfying tension to it as well, at least in parts.
While also being playful. I think
Yes.
the playfulness of it kind of drove it forward with the chemistry between the two leads and how, like, I'm going to say the word again, kinetic it felt at times. That's a good. I did like it. I gave it a 7 out of 10. It's a better Twitter thread than movie. Because as a movie, we've seen this kind of stuff before. And now, mind you, like I said, the playfulness kind of separates it a little bit from other movies of this ilk. But it is just a better Twitter thread, because as like a thing that actually happened, it's like, yeah, that's interesting. And as a movie, it's like, well, you know, we see these like prostitute, you know, whatever movies. But I did like it.
It's nice to know that in 2021 we still get movies that's just hooker with a heart of gold. Like, it's interesting that in 2021 that trope has not gone anywhere.
My number 18 is The Witcher, Nightmare of the Wolf.
Ooh.
So we're going back to the animated scene on this. So it gorgeously animated. The violence is intense. The monsters are interesting. It does all the stuff that The Witcher should do. The pacing is brisk and exciting, even a little heartfelt. It's a prequel of Vesemir, which is really cool because it fleshed out the whole world. I'm a big Witcher guy, like to the point of like I've read most of the books, and I don't normally read book series, so like, and I obviously I love the games, I love the show, I love this movie, but yeah, I won't harp on too much about it. But yeah, there's a lot of Witcher bias in my pick here, because I see the Witcher franchise, the property, and I'm like, yeah, I already like this. Unless you're absolutely terrible, you cannot sink my love for The Witcher.
My number 18 best movie of 2021 is The Eternals. So we're diving back into the Marvel movies. And look, Chloe Zhao is tremendously talented. It's like her ability to do something like Nomadland and have Nomadland be as incredible as it was, and then turn around and be handed this, like the polar opposite of that movie, and be able to pull it off the way that she did, it just speaks to the massive amounts of talent that she has. This was a highly anticipated one for me, and I know for my friend Sarah, who I mentioned before, I think it was like her most or second most anticipated movie of all of last year. I don't think it quite hits on the same level as some other Marvel or MCU or even just superhero in general offerings this year, but I wound up caring about these characters, and that was something that I don't necessarily know that I thought was going to happen, at least with all of them, because like there's a lot of characters in this movie, obviously, and they're all considerably like primary characters, so I didn't necessarily know that I'd wind up caring about all of them, and I did wind up caring about all of them. I thought early on in the movie maybe it lacked a little bit of cohesion and oomph, certainly in like the first half of the movie, I'd say. The second half of the movie totally makes up for that, and the second half clearly better than the first half of the movie, at least to me, and it winds up being fairly high on my list, of course, this year. We're going to give that one number 18 on my top 30 best movies of the year.
My number 17 is One Night in Miami. I talked about the ensemble cast, how I got lost in the film because of them. It's like, this is everything that a dialogue-heavy film should be, like really interested in talking and a great look at different perspectives. These people have different perspectives on things, and it's like a nuanced look. It doesn't just go, this is right, this is wrong.
Right.
I'm going to simplify this one while making this one deeper. It's like, no, they go deep. They go deep because it's basically just a lot of talking, and it accomplished that feat of, I just kind of forgot I was watching a movie occasionally. It's like I was just watching a bunch of people talking. I was just creepily standing up in the corner watching these four dudes just chat about stuff.
the fly on the wall genre of movie, if you will. Yeah, absolutely.
So my number 17 is One Night in Miami.
And I mean the high level of charisma of the characters that are being represented.
Yeah,
right.
Well, that too. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My number 17 best movie of 2021 is Candyman. So I think this is probably the weakest of Jordan Peele's forays into. I mean, I don't think he didn't direct this, but it's still like very. He had a lot to do with the creation of the movie. So I think of his forays into horror, no matter what the context of it, I think it's probably his weakest entry. But that's to say that I've really enjoyed all of his forays into the genre up to this point. I think it was really accessible to the Candyman lore for people that may have either never heard of it or aren't like deep into the lore of the Candyman character. Like, I think it did a really good job of at least of giving you the background of the character. So even if you had no context to Candyman whatsoever heading into this movie, you have enough context to understand what you're seeing, understand what's going on, kind of how it relates back to things that you would have seen in the original Candyman movie, which I think came out the year I was born. I think it came out in '84. I think. I could be wrong about that, but I found it really accessible in that way, and I was like, oh, I'm not confused in the least about what's going on, and I have context for stuff. Even if I just didn't remember it happening before, I kind of have the context of those things. Candyman I just found to be suspenseful, really well made across the board. Jordan Peele does have these things, whether it's in movies that he writes or directs or produces or whatever, that I've said this about him before, that he'll sacrifice narrative for concepts. Yeah. Like, I feel like he'll have 2 or 3 really cool ideas for something he wants in this movie, and it's gonna be in there, whether or not it helps tell the story or not. He's just like, no, this is gonna be in this movie somewhere. And I think there was a moment or two of that even found its way into this, even though, again, it's a movie that he didn't direct. But I really dug Candyman. I was really pleased with it. So it winds up being my number 17.
I never ended up seeing it.
Oh, no?
I was gonna watch it a few times. I couldn't bring myself to do it. So, sorry, Candyman. My number 16 is Riders of Justice, a film that came just out of nowhere for me. I was like, oh, Mads Mikkelsen, I can never pronounce the name of the movie. I'm like, I'm gonna check this out. There are moments of black humor scattered throughout that work, but it does work more as a drama. Mads is just great. He's just killing it out there. When he's going around murdering people to try to get revenge because his wife died, I think, in a train accident or something.
Okay.
And he's told that there's these group of people or whatever that were the cause of it. It's been a while since I watched it, but that's basically the gist. He's told that someone caused it to happen, so he's out to get revenge on them. When he's off killing, there's these other people helping him. They're like legit terrified of him, even though they're on his side because he's so good and he's fishing in like stone face while doing it. They're like actually terrified, and that made it look really good. It has a bunch of elements that I dig. Like it kind of goes a little bit into psychology, not a deep dive or whatever. It plays with data a little bit. If it has a whole bunch of stuff that if it had a bunny, it would be like, let's go, but it doesn't have a bunny. I'll spoil a little bit because I want to talk about the twist, which I think is really, really potent. Throughout the whole movie, he's thinking that things are going a certain way, and then there's they see an image of some guy, and they're like, okay, there's a 95% probability that this is the guy that we need to go after, and all this other stuff, right? So you think, okay, good, it's around 95% chance that this is it. So he operates on the high probability, and does all this, and then you find out that it wasn't him. So the 5%. I think that's a cool twist. And so then it's sad because he waged a war for no reason. And it's at the point where one of the villains, who's just kind of fighting back because there's this dude coming after them, he's basically like, this sucks, what did we do to you? And it's so tragic. And I love it. And I forgot how much I loved it until I started talking about it. I probably should have put this a little higher, honestly, because
From the sounds of things, yeah.
at one point this was like one of my favorite movies. I mean, I guess it still technically is one of my favorite movies, but I probably could have put this a little higher, honestly. So maybe move this up a few spots at least. But yeah, Riders of Justice is such a good movie.
And Mads Mikkelsen is the kind of performer that would pull this kind of thing, this kind of character off tremendously well. My number 16 best movie of 2021 will be a relatively quick one because I've talked about it prior. It is Land, starring Robin Wright. This is also Robin Wright's directorial debut, so it's not a surprise to me that like it was fairly evident that it was her directorial debut. Like there are certain moments in this, like you have this beautiful Wyoming backdrop, and there are just some instances where it's just not used to its fullest effect. And I'm sure somebody that has more experience would have used it to its fuller effect. But that's not like, it's not a harsh criticism. It was just very obvious to me that it was Robin Wright's directorial debut, right? There's just like, this shot needs to breathe. This one can be shorter, kind of thing. Like just give me a little more of what is being offered for you to work with, and I think it would have been impactful even more. Really, really strong performance from her at the middle, and the ensemble that's kind of around her when we actually get to see other people come into the movie. It's a strong ensemble performance. Might lean a little on the melodramatic a little bit, but was a really impactful and compelling story from top to bottom, and another really interesting examination of grief and trauma and the healing from trauma. So Robin Wright and Land winds up number 16.
Now, even though this person I'm about to mention doesn't actually have that much more experience, certainly more accomplishments, but you know who would have been good for this, judging from what you said? Chloe Zhao.
Yeah.
She would have clobbered if that movie.
100. You know what? 100%, because there are enough similarities between the type of movie that Land and Nomadland were that absolutely 100%. It would have been
the remake is coming.
Yeah,
that's her next project. She's gonna remake Land.
Remake a love movie that came out less than a year.
So my number 15 is we're going back to the MCU for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Very good.
I actually had really high hopes for this, and while I definitely enjoyed it, I do have some criticisms that I'd like to lay out. First, you come from the martial arts in this one, and I'm a big proponent of like this idea of like, I really like when an MCU movie has interesting action that kind of puts a different spin on what we've already seen, because like I don't know, I'll use Ant-Man as an example. The big small dynamic has like some interesting choreography and things you can do with it, and I won't list off other MCU movies that kind of do that. And this doesn't quite nail the martial arts thing to the level that I hoped. Although there was some moments, like the bus scene was a compelling piece of that, and if the rest of the action was like that, I would have been like, alright, this would have been higher in the list. Because that's what I went to this one for. And the hand-to-hand is great. I'm not saying it's not great, but I've seen martial arts movies done way better in terms of just the action. I think Shang-Chi, like, he's a good character. Wenwu or whatever, I think is his dad. He was like a pretty solid villain, like not the best in the MCU, but solid. You know, and the other thing I wish though is the Dweller, like the thing that comes near the end.
Yeah.
I wish I would have been given more time and more impact, because that thing was really cool. And I would have been harder on the movie if there wasn't another villain that was actually pretty good. Because if it would have just been the Dweller, I would have been like, oh look, the MCU problem of bad villains. But there was another guy to kind of pick up the slack there that did have reasons for doing what he was doing in a personal connection to the main character.
Yeah.
I've kind of pooed on the movie a little bit, but ultimately it just ends up being another great superhero movie because I don't think Marvel misses. I do wish this was a little better. Like, I do wish that the fighting was better. And now some people are probably like, are you nuts? The fighting was amazing. I'm like, I don't know. I've seen martial arts movies that are just more entertaining from just a fight perspective. But it was still great. I mean, really, though, when you think about it in terms of this year, even though I found it didn't live up to my standards in that regard, it still probably has some of the best martial arts of the year, I guess. When I think of it in just context of this year.
My number 15 is a movie that I spoke about a little bit earlier, and that is King Richard. Very clearly, I enjoyed this movie. And in fact, this, I think, is where my 8 out of 10s began. No, sorry, Land is where my 8 out of 10s began. So clearly I enjoyed this movie. Like an 8 out of 10, there's, especially on my scale, there's nothing wrong in the world with an 8 out of 10. Again, as I spoke about before, King Richard, that's marketed as a Venus and Serena Williams biopic, yet is named after their father, it's just strange. It's kind of strange in a way. Again, this kind of flip-flops between masterful, like I said in an earlier video, the best tennis that has ever been put in a movie, period. And there have been movies about like Billie Jean King, but it's the best tennis scenes that have ever been put in a movie as far as I'm concerned. And at times, Will Smith, for everything that everybody can say about him, can be a powerhouse performer. And he has moments in this movie where he is a powerhouse of a performer.
Yep.
The girls, by the way, are also altogether great. Both of them, both the girl that's playing Venus and the girl that's playing Serena, both of them are altogether great and wholly convincing. And there are times when it feels like I'm not watching a movie when I'm watching them, because neither one of them as actresses are familiar to me. Right. So like when there's moments when you're watching them, it's like, oh, I'm just watching somebody's home movies. You know, it's like I feel like I'm watching the actual people. Now, then there's the other side of that, where it's undeniable at this point, because he's done a few of these. Will Smith plays a daddy knows best character, and that's what he is in this movie. Yeah. It's always, Richard always knows best. Yeah. And they make a point of it, they almost make fun of it in the movie, that's like, oh, Richard always knows best, but Will Smith has played this character before. And again, it was just weird to me that it doesn't focus on who I feel are the primary characters and who I feel that the marketing says are the primary characters, which is the two tennis players that the whole world knows about. And it's also strange because it focuses very strongly on Venus and almost not at all on Serena. And Serena is far and away the more successful tennis player. Like, she is arguably, I think it's a very strong argument, probably the greatest female tennis player to ever live. So it's strange that it focuses on Venus, even though I understand that Venus is the older of the Williams sisters, so maybe that's done that way. At the end of the day, A, again, I really enjoyed the movie, and B, both of the Williams sisters exec produced this. So I have no doubt in my mind it's telling the exact story that they want it to tell. So that could be telling in and of itself, but I really enjoyed it, and it probably doesn't sound like I did, but I really enjoyed the movie. Again, the tennis scenes are phenomenal. They're filmed incredibly, they're produced incredibly. So the performances, by and large, are very, very good. So this winds up being my number 15 movie of the year. Really, really dug it. Obviously had my issues with it, but at the end of the day, really enjoyed it.
I have nothing to add to that, because I didn't like that enough to make my list.
Fair enough.
My number 14 is Wrath of Man. Oh. Let's start it off with a contentious statement first. One of Guy Ritchie's best movies. Wow. I'm partial to Snatch, and this is another contentious pick, Revolver. Okay. Which might be seen as like his worst, actually. Those are the ones I'm partial to. Mm-hmm. But I'm adding Wrath of Man into the mix. It's not even like the flashiest Ritchie. He just kind of understands the fundamentals and lets stuff breathe, and gives Jason Statham a well-written script to work with. I can't remember if Ritchie wrote it. He probably did. What this movie did for me was build tension really well. Literally from the opening scene, can't remember what the song's called. Like it's, I gave the soundtrack some props, like an honorable mention. Like the first music you hear just instantly hooked me, and I was like, oh, this is tense. And then I just really liked the movie from that point on. Like, yeah, like I said, it's not the most original Ritchie, but it's one of my favorites. And I didn't really expect it to be one of my favorites, but it ended up being that way.
Nice.
Statham and Ritchie continues to be a winning combination.
Yeah, it seems like it's the, I don't know if it's the single best thing, but it's a pretty good thing for both of their careers to continue working together.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, for sure. My number 14, best movie of 2021, is Godzilla vs. Kong.
Godzilla!
And on the sheer size of things, I'm so glad I saw this in a movie theater. I just don't think it's going to have the same impact watching it from home unless you have a massive size screen in a room, like, you know, relative to the room that you're in, I guess. I'm just happy that I got to see it on a big screen with surround sound, and I just get to kind of take in the whole aesthetic of a movie this size. Now, it's funny because I don't know whether it makes camera or not, I don't know. You were talking about pro wrestling earlier. You mentioned pro wrestling. Clearly, the folks that did this movie are pro wrestling fans. Because the actual moments of Godzilla vs. Kong is a babyface 2 out of 3 falls match.
Yeah.
That has like a clear and definitive winner. So, I've been hashtag Team Godzilla from the start. I got no disrespect for Kong, but I've been hashtag Team Godzilla for 7 years now. So I'm very much on Team Godzilla. But look, pro wrestling, babyface 2 out of 3 falls match done extremely well with a clear-cut winner. And whether this completely caps the MonsterVerse and they don't wind up making any more of them, or whether this has left room open for more MonsterVerse movies in the future, which is what I hope, because I think all of them basically have been done very well. So I hope we get to see more. Whether it's done one thing or the other, I think this could cap it off well, or it still leaves room to go further in the future. So Godzilla vs. Kong is my number 14.
My number 13 is The Suicide Squad.
Okay.
I like seeing an R-rated Guardians movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's great with these ragtag groups of misfits. From the opening bit, though, it was so awesome because it was so unpredictable. Like, here are some characters, and then they just die.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, anything can happen here. That's cool. Like, all bets are off. I love that because you don't get that a lot of movies. So it was nice to just see him let loose and just do whatever the hell he wanted, going back to his roots and making something that's a little bit more trashy. I mean, it's artistic, but he got to play with a lot of gore and all that. The final little fight or whatever wasn't quite as good, so I knocked down a little bit. But with that said, I did really like, there's like a Harley Quinn fight scene that was really shot beautifully. And
right.
this movie, honestly, just a blast.
Yeah, just fun.
Like, at one point I had this rated at 9.5, but I did knock down to a 9. So it was amongst my favorite. Man, the movie was awesome. So when I hear you say that he's pretentious, I'm like, no, but like, I really, 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 and I didn't expect to care about these characters, and I was even invested in them.
Yeah.
So it was a fantastic joyride.
Yeah. My number 13, best movie of 2021, actually gives me an opportunity to expand a little bit on a movie that I talked about earlier. It's Encanto. And again, doesn't really stand up to like the greatest Disney movies I've ever seen. If you didn't get a chance to see Encanto, it's the story of this Colombian family who have been basically imbued with magical powers. Each one of them has some different power, except for one member of the family, who's the primary character in the movie, has no power at all, quote unquote. And again, it's an exploration of like what people think makes them special. And again, this is the kind of stuff that Disney movies do great. It's trying to, obviously you come to the conclusion at the end that like what makes you special is just being you. Yeah. And you're the one that's special, and everyone is special, and it's messages like that. And Disney does these kinds of messages and these kind of movies immaculately, and obviously it's so beautifully animated. Although I tell you, I'm getting. They want to work on the faces a little bit. Like, if Disney just wants to kind of... Because Disney's kind of been doing the Disney faces for quite... Like, they basically haven't changed the way their faces have looked since, like, post-Brave. Right. And it's been a while. So, I think you can kind of, like, maybe work on the faces a little bit. Maybe just, you know, give them a bit of a different look. But, look, the movie as a whole is really, really good. The characters are really interesting. I already obviously gushed about the music and the music as a storytelling device in movies like this, and as it always does, in the end, the emotion and the beauty of it all wound up getting to me. It still, like I say, doesn't wind up like the greatest Disney movies that I've ever seen, but obviously good enough to land very highly on my list this year at number 13.
All right, my number 12 is Last Night in Soho. Man, we gushed about the performances. My girl Thomasin McKenzie, my number 1 pick, and you thought highly of her, and Anya Taylor-Joy, also a great performance. Stylish directing. Edgar Wright made a really good horror movie that, as I said before, I'm just kind of repeating everything, but you may not have watched the previous videos. It reminded me of Suspiria while not being as good. Excellent use of color, suspense. One of his, well, I say one of his best, top 3 maybe. I think I'm like a Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, and then this, I think. I haven't put any thought into this. I just threw this out there with no thought whatsoever. And yeah, so number 12, Last Night in Soho.
I think I'd have to go Hot Fuzz, this, and Baby Driver.
Fair dues.
I think.
Fair dues.
Well, Scott Pilgrim.
Oh, I forgot about Scott.
Yeah, this is my number 12, another movie that we have gushed about in multiple spots, certainly from a performance perspective. Judas and the Black Messiah, it was earlier on your list as well. Really great direction by Shaka King. Of course, I talked about Shaka as a honorable mention on my best directors. And again, those anchored by those dueling performances of Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, the story of FBI informant William O'Neill betraying Fred Hampton, the leader of the Illinois Black Panthers. I kind of love that, like, this movie came out this year. Last year you had the movie The Trial of the Chicago Seven.
Right.
And I think it would be really interesting to watch those two movies back to back as kind of a duology almost, as like an exploration of the culture wars in the 60s in America, right? Like, I think if you could take those two movies as, and obviously both movies are presented from a particular perspective, and you certainly have to understand that going in. But to kind of take those two movies as like a spiritual duology of this view of the late 60s in the U.S., I think it would be really interesting to sit down and just watch those two movies back to back.
Yeah.
And the way they kind of present both of those things. Obviously, two things happening at similar times, but in the same place, both in Illinois, right? Yeah. So I just think that would be really interesting. That's about all I have to say. I mean, Judas and the Black Messiah was obviously a tremendous movie, and I've talked about it. We've both talked about it a bunch in these videos, so yeah. It winds up number 12 for me.
I actually think, knowing what I know about your picks from previous videos, I actually ended up expecting this to be a little bit higher in your list than it was. But whatever. Still
That's good. It leads for some intrigue, especially into the top 10.
Yeah. Okay, so my number 11 is Small Engine Repair.
Okay.
I had no interest in this when I heard the name, but then I was just looking, I was like, I wonder what John Bernthal's doing this year. Because I really want to talk about John Bernthal. And I was like, oh, he's in this. He wasn't technically the main character. He was kind of part of a trio that were just, like, best buds. Okay. And so close that, like, the main character's daughter is basically a daughter to them. Like, that level of camaraderie between the, the boys.
Yeah.
Which drove the film completely. Their chemistry, I can't remember the names of the other two, because I got a Bernthal bias. But they played off each other so well. And actually the main character, I wish I should have looked up his name, he actually did triple duty, like the guy who played it. He directed, wrote, and starred in it.
Action project.
He deserves real credit for this. While I think Bernthal's performance was a little better, might be the bias, he was certainly really competent in the acting. The writing was superb, and the directing was like solid, but not especially memorable. Just solid. Right. But sorry, you only did 2 things excellently, and the other one was only quite good. You suck. But there was like 2 moments in this movie that made me go, oh snap! Like, because most of the time it's just these people like talking to each other, and the daughter of the main character goes through an issue, and then it gets darker all of a sudden, and it was like, oh crap! Because then when I figured out something was happening, I was like, oh no, and then something else, I was like, oh no, and I just really ended up liking it. Now my stepdad, or my dad, I don't know why I call my stepdad, he didn't like it, because I recommended it, but he didn't like it, but I loved it, and it was one of those movies that came out of left field, because when I saw the title, I was like, why would I care about this?
Right.
And it ended up being amazing.
Bernthal is such an interesting actor just in general, but such an interesting actor to really sit down and dissect his filmography.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like he was in King Richard.
Oh,
He was the tennis coach, right?
Right.
And you look at his filmography, and it's like it's kind of refreshing to see him play a character that isn't a scumbag.
Yeah.
But then it's like, boy, does he ever do his best work with characters that are scumbags.
But you know what? In Small Engine Repair, he was not a scumbag, and he was really good. And like I thought about watching like the Sopranos movie because I know he's in it. I don't know how much. And then there was another movie he did that he was in. I can't remember what it was called. Those Who Wish Me
Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was in that too, but I had no interest in either of those movies.
Right.
So I just couldn't do it because I really wanted to like put Bernthal in the best actors but I didn't know if I'd be able to on Body of Work or not. It's not really the lead character in any of these, but but then I ended up not seeing two of the movies anyway, so there was no chance of it. But I just always like seeing him.
This is a pro John Bernthal movie awards.
Definitely.
And we'll end this video with my number 11 best movie of 2021, The French Dispatch, one of the last movies that I watched before we sat down to do these awards. So obviously, hey, Wes Anderson, good job making a great Wes Anderson movie. It's a Wes Anderson movie, and it's an immaculate Wes Anderson movie. And one of the talents of a guy like Wes Anderson is he can bring together this exceptionally talented ensemble cast. And you're looking at, like, you got Benicio del Toro, Lea Seydoux are in that first one, Timothy Chalamet, Frances McDormand, Willem Dafoe is in this, Adrian Brody, a really, really, really great cast top to bottom. And just the way that Wes Anderson movies feel and sound and the way that they're presented and the tiny little details too. It's funny, you could have called this movie The Little Things, but the tiny little details. The name of the fictional town is Ennui-sur-Blaze. So it's boredom on boredom. It's like basically what that translates to, like disinterest on boredom, and it's like, okay, just the tiny little things like that. It's just like another director that you could probably say, like, wow, Wes Anderson, you're really pretentious, but you make great movies. Like that's an argument I could put against Wes Anderson, but it's not even against him because it's a feature of Wes Anderson. And apparently I'm just at the point now where I'm basically going to love any Wes Anderson movie that I see. And The French Dispatch is exactly that for me, and it winds up number 11 in 2021.
One, just like Judas, I kind of thought it would be top 10, but it was close. Two, a little inside baseball, I suppose.
Okay.
By the time I was able to see this, I had seen so many movies that I didn't really. Well, one, I didn't really feel like watching many more movies because I wasn't like super pumped for this. But I actually checked Criticker to see if you had seen it.
Right.
And if you had seen it, because this was like a late watch for you.
Very.
And you hadn't seen it when
like 2 days ago.
Yeah, when I went to look, like, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, I don't remember how long ago. I was like, Justin hasn't seen it. I don't know if he will, so I ain't gonna bother. So I would have watched it, just if I had known. I don't know. I didn't have, that's the thing, like, I'm never really super interested in watching a Wes Anderson movie, even though I've really liked a few of them. Like Fantastic Mr. Fox. I adore that movie.
Yeah.
And he did Moonrise Kingdom, I believe.
Yes.
Which I also liked, and then I liked Isle of Dogs, not as much as Fantastic Mr. Fox, but I like animated Wes Anderson.
Yeah, you had mentioned that before. It's like there's a difference between animated Wes Anderson and live action Wes Anderson, at least in terms of your enjoyment of his movies, I guess.
So, although Moonrise Kingdom wasn't animated, but still, I liked it. But anyway, it's a good pick.
Thus ends the second part of our top 30 best movies of 2021, and now the main event of the main event, coming up now, our top 10 best movies of 2021, number 10, all the way up to our number 1 choices. We have predicted prior to when the awards began what we think our each other's number 1 movie is on the year. You will find out at the end of the next video whether we are right or whether we are wrong. Come back around. Top 10 best movies of 2021.